Welcome to the podcast series showcasing the winners of the 2024 Dyslexia Canada Educational Excellence Awards. We established this award to honor the outstanding contributions of individuals nationwide who work tirelessly to advance core pillars of Dyslexia Canada's mission, ensuring that all Canadian children have access to universal early screening and evidence-based, systematic, explicit foundational reading instruction. Right now, just over half of Canadian children are living in provinces committed to implementing universal early screening and evidence-based, systematic, explicit foundational reading instruction. In this episode, we'll be speaking with an individual who has made a significant contribution to improving literacy in the province of Quebec. Melanie Brethour is a teacher at the Riverside School Board, which is responsible for Anglophone public schools on the South Shore of Montreal. She's also the founder of the Quebec chapter of Decoding Dyslexia and the recipient of the 2024 Dyslexia Canada Educational Excellence Award. Congratulations, Melanie. Now, you've dedicated a considerable part of your career to studying and educating others about dyslexia and developmental language disorders. And you have a real personal experience with dyslexia in your own family, particularly with your son.
Yes, so I am a full-time elementary resource teacher, and I have been pretty much in special education, I would say the majority of my career. I've been teaching almost, I think I'm going into my 20th year of teaching. And, you would think that somebody with a special education background would know quite a bit about dyslexia, the signs. And it turns out I really did not know a lot about dyslexia until my son was having difficulty in kindergarten. I knew then it was probably dyslexia because it was very obvious that he was struggling. He couldn't remember his letter names, his sounds, and all that. And so we knew that there was something. It was just we had to figure out what it was. And eventually, when he turned 9, we finally were able to get him the diagnosis of dyslexia.
So is that what drove your interest after that?
Yes, so it was almost like an obsessive mission to learn as much as I could about dyslexia, because I wanted to be able to help Ben. Since he was having difficulty in kindergarten, I was helping him at home, as any mom would do, but because I wear the two hats as a teacher, I was working with him nonstop at home, trying to just, help improve his reading because I definitely saw that he was struggling. And it turns out that as time went on, I did webinars, professional development, and I realized, though, unfortunately, I was not giving him the effective instruction at home. And that's when I went on a mission to not only help my son, but then help all the students that I work with as well. I realized that I was not teaching effectively based on the research that we call the science of reading.
So you took up the challenge on your own initially and then discovered that there was a proven method that you could use. Is that right?
Yes, so we are very, I think in Quebec and many places around the world, a very, I would say, balanced literacy approach, which is really not effective or based on any research into how we learn to read, a lot of misconceptions. And I was teaching that way, and I was reinforcing that at home with Benjamin. And when I started to learn about dyslexia, that's when I first heard about a body of research called the Science of Reading. That was the first time I heard about Wharton Gilliam, all these evidence-based programs or approaches. And I had never heard of any of this before in my 15 years of teaching at that time. And that's when I went kind of down the rabbit hole to really learn as much as I could, not only to help my son Benjamin, but also help my students that I'm working with.
Some of the other winners of this award have told me that you do your best to teach in a way that you hope is right, and then all of a sudden, out of nowhere, you're forced to almost turn your back on all the training that you've had before that moment. And I imagine that must be very difficult.
It is. I have still a lot of teacher guilt, obviously, because I always feel like I worked with students who were struggling mainly, and I really wasn't effectively teaching them. And also with my son as well, I was reinforcing all these not, the best practices when it comes to learning to read. So I definitely have a lot of mom and teacher guilt, but I think the way I sleep better at night is when you know better, you do better. And it was just because I wasn't taught this way to teach effectively. And I'm somebody who loves professional development. I love learning. It was never about not wanting to change. It was just, I had never heard of any of this until I, had that aha moment when I watched a webinar one-on-one about dyslexia, and that's when I heard about all those terms I was talking about before, the science of reading, Morton Gilliam, evidence-based programs and approaches.
Well, it sounds like you've seen a lot of progress, both in your own family and in the students as well.
Well, I'm going to say if I could film myself maybe, 5 years ago even, or 10 years ago, and film myself now as a, interventionist, I consider myself now, it is night and day. It's completely transformed my teaching, and I'm still always learning. I always say there's always room to grow and learn. And again, with the research into how we learn to read, it's always going to be changing as well. So I always think there might be something I'm doing in my classroom this year, whereas next year there might be a better approach. And I'm open to change. So I think that's really important as teachers. For my son, I definitely, obviously, it has helped him. He was when I did my Orton and Gilliam training, he was my little guinea pig because it was during COVID. And I really noticed him improving. But my son is, I'm going to say, there's a continuum from mild, moderate to severe. He's definitely on the severe part of the spectrum, I guess you could say. And so I always feel that's why I have a lot of guilt. If I knew what I knew now, I could have helped him earlier on. Like I always think, would he be mildly dyslexic? Like you're going to be dyslexic no forever. There's no cure for dyslexia, but I just always think of early intervention, and sadly he didn't get that effective early intervention early on, but he had it a little bit later.
You founded the Quebec chapter of Decoding Dyslexia, and the goal there is to broaden our understanding about dyslexia and to spread awareness. So, what gap have you been trying to fill?
Well, that's it. I always felt like here I am, a teacher, special education, as I mentioned, and I did not know enough about dyslexia or even how to even help my own son. And I had heard about Decoding Dyslexia and reached out to them, and they were so helpful. It started in the States as a grassroots movement by parents, and there's one in every state, and I believe there's, I think, in 6 provinces now in Canada. And they were really helpful. They helped me create my logo. And I mean, they're doing some amazing things like changing legislation. They have, members, but as a full-time teacher, I figured I'm going to start with a Facebook page where I'm just going to share information, not only for parents, but teachers as well. And so I just share resources, information. I do get questions often asked, how do I navigate? Where do I start? Does my child have dyslexia? So it was really just, I really want to help teachers, but especially parents, kind of know, where to start. And, it is a very difficult journey watching your child struggle in school and know that they're not alone. And that's really why I wanted to start Decoding Dyslexia chapter in Quebec.
As a classroom teacher, can you share how you've been implementing a structured literacy approach in your classroom?
When I did my Orton Gilliam training, that really helped me. And that was during COVID when I did the course, the associate level, and then I started my practicum with Ben. And it was during COVID, so it was difficult. You usually do not work with your own child, but I think they made that exception because it was during COVID and it was difficult to work with students one-on-one. And so I started implementing the Orton Gilliam approach into my classroom. And that was, as with anything, I'm the type that, I maybe might try too many things, but I always encourage teachers just to try a few things and slowly make sure those things are implemented properly, and then you can add more to it. I've also over the years have learned about programs that are evidence-based or approaches, and so we've kind of adopted a few programs at my school as well, not only myself as an interventionist, but a few classes as well. So it's kind of been spreading to other classrooms, and it's been wonderful. And yeah, it's night and day, as I said. If I was to videotape myself 5, 10 years ago to now, I'm explicit, systematic. I'm teaching the rules that I never was taught. When to use a C, when to use a K, when to use a CK. I'm the first to admit it. I think I was, 42 or 41 when I first learned those rules, and I'm teaching these rules to my students, and they're remembering them. And even the students who are the most, I'm going to say, I do think they're, some of them are dyslexic. Sometimes it takes time in the education system to get, evaluation or a diagnosis. But the point of always, I tell everybody, is to get that early intervention early on, as soon as we see signs of students struggling. And it's really night and day, and you see how happy these kids who have struggled for so long are finally able to decode, words and spell words, and they're beaming. Today actually I had a group of students. We were doing I always do like a little assessment at the end of the week to see what sounds or concepts that they're having difficulty in. It's not a test, it's just to see the concepts that I taught, are they mastering it? And I say, well, if you're not mastering it, then I need to teach you again, or try something different. And I said, we're only going to write one sentence. And then they all said, no, let's write two sentences. And these are kids that are struggling. So I do talk always about the mental health piece. And that's something that's really personal to me, because not being able to read and have difficulty day in, day out definitely takes a toll on your mental health, no matter what age you are.
As a teacher, I'm sure those are the moments that you live for.
Yes, I do. I love my job, and I have to say, even as interventionist, I have very rare that I don't have students who don't want to come. They always want to come, and they're learning to read and write, and they can see they can see the success. So it's wonderful.
Now, Melanie, you've been educating yourself about dyslexia and developmental language disorders for many years now, and you've completed the Orton Gillingham training and become a SARI certified structured literacy classroom educator, among other accomplishments. Now, throughout your journey, you've been sharing your knowledge with your school community. Can you tell us how you've been doing that?
Well, I'm very lucky. I've been at my school for 5 years, but we're a small school board in the sense that, we kind of know everybody, or you've seen somebody at a workshop or things like that. And my school is fantastic. My colleagues are fantastic. They know my story with my son. They know I'm very passionate about that. And I think as teachers, you don't want to be told, what you're doing is wrong. I think that's not the best approach, because nowadays, just teaching the last 20 years, it has changed so much. There's so much more on teachers' plates that I think, you don't want to add more to their plate, but it's really important that we slowly make change, in the sense of, just talking in the staff room, what's working, what's not working. What I actually did was I adopted a universal screener, Acadians, which I have to say was a game changer. And I told everybody at my school that we're switching to Acadians this year, and nobody ever says no or anything. They just go with it, which is wonderful. And I shared our data of how many students are not reading proficiently at my school. And I started with that in a meeting, and it wasn't really very good in terms of how many students were reading proficiently. And I started with that, and I said, you know what? We have a problem here, and there's no blame, no shame. It's just that unfortunately we were all taught maybe not the most effective ways. And moving forward, we can make some changes, and not overnight, but slowly. And I really had a lot of buy-in from my school. And so it's been wonderful in that sense that they're really open to that.
What kind of advice would you give to teachers who are just starting their learning journey in this field?
Well, I think it takes time. Like I said before, I'm constantly learning, and I feel like I'm obsessed with this. It's almost, I always joke, you're going down the science of rabbit reading hole, because we know that 95% of students can learn to read, and we're talking about the students with dyslexia. And I think, you're not going to learn everything overnight, but there's a few things that you can definitely do right away. I always say, a few things like getting rid of the three cueing would be my top one, where we're encouraging students to, guess based on the first letter of the word or look at the picture to help them read as, quote, a strategy. And we know that based on research, this is not how we learn to read. So I used to do that as a teacher because I was taught that way. And I remember teaching this ineffective way for many years, not only with my son, but my students. And there are definitely some things that teachers can do that it's not based on any evidence. As I said, the three cueing, using like leveled readers as well. There's no really levels when it comes to reading. And there's so much wonderful information out there that people are sharing about, dyslexia and the science of reading, and so many wonderful organizations like Dyslexia Canada that is really hopefully making change for schools. And I know in Ontario they just revamped their ELA curriculum. I'm hoping in Quebec will follow, and other provinces as well have been making changes. So it just takes time, but find a buddy, a science of reading buddy, and it's wonderful. I'm going to a conference next weekend at the IDA Ontario one, and I'm bringing several of my colleagues and friends, and it just takes time. But my biggest thing is there's no shame, no blame to say, you know what, I haven't been doing the best in terms of reading just because I just wasn't taught this.
What sort of feedback are you getting from parents?
Well, parents, I think, I'm going to assume don't know really how their child learns to read, and it's often how they were taught also how to read. So it's really about informing them. So as an interventionist, I let them know, I'm going to be working with your child, and these are their goals. And so I always have like a little pamphlet or information about this is what I'm working on with your child. This is the approach or program that I'm going to be using. And I'm hoping that as time goes on, the classroom teachers, and many of them, I have to say, have been doing a phenomenal job making those changes about, like just mentioned to you, like everybody knows at my school, the three queuing needs to be done and out. And I think it's just communicating with parents that your child may be having difficulty or they're having difficulty, and that we are providing them intervention. And I think that's key. I think a lot of parents, and even as myself as a teacher, there's a lot of misconceptions not only about dyslexia, but how we learn to read. And I used to think reading was natural. You're just going to pick it up through osmosis, which I'm sure a lot of parents think that as well. But that's not, how we learn to read. Reading is not natural. It needs to be explicitly taught. And this, let's wait and see in grade one, they're a summer baby, they're a boy, they're going to catch up. We don't want to say that to parents. We want to flag them right away and say, you know what, your child is having difficulty with reading and writing, and we want to be able to provide that intervention right away. And maybe next year they might not need the intervention. I've seen that. We kind of nip it in the bud, and those students who are still struggling most likely have dyslexia, because the gap we want to close that gap, but it takes a little bit longer to close.
How important is it for kids to become successful readers?
Well, I always say, everybody has the right to read. It's a human right to be able to read. And unfortunately, a lot of our kids, our students, are not being taught effectively. And it's not anybody's fault. It's just, for myself, I can speak for myself. This is what I was taught how to do. And I obviously have realized with my son that I was not teaching effectively. And that's when I went down the rabbit hole. And when I mentioned the mental health piece, I see that with my son, it has such a tremendous impact of not being able to read. I think people take for granted those who can read fairly easily. They picked it up probably like through osmosis. It just came naturally to them in that way, because we do know that about 40% of our students are going to pick it up fairly easily, but the 60% of our students definitely need to be explicitly taught. And can you imagine going to school day in and day out, not being able to read? If you don't have a teacher who's supportive and will call on you to read out loud, it's nerve-wracking. I remember always telling the story. I feel like I'm a proficient reader. I do not have dyslexia, But I remember in high school when my teacher would pick on the round robin type of thing. You're going to read this paragraph, you're going to read. And I remember being so stressed and counting how many people were in front of me and practicing that paragraph. And I'm thinking, I'm proficient. What about those students who are struggling, who can't decode? So the mental health piece alone is huge because it really does cause a lot of anxiety. And there's a lot of statistics out there saying, if you're not a proficient reader, the impact it has on not only your life as a 7-year-old, but if you continue to struggle throughout your life, it really impacts on a daily basis what you need to do. Think of it, filling out a driver's application, your taxes, prescription bottles, warning signs. And so I want to, spread the message that everybody has the right to read, and we can provide that because they do say 95% of all students can learn to read.
You've been very active on social media. You've been sharing your knowledge with fellow educators and teachers as well. So how are you using those platforms to promote awareness?
Well, I would never thought in a million years that social media would be, it can be a really positive thing in the sense there's an amazing community of not only parents but advocates for dyslexia awareness, the science of reading. And I started with my Decoding Dyslexia Quebec page, and I just find it, not in any way space. You're just sharing information, and then, people share it, and there's kind of a little buzz here and there. But I started a Soar with Dyslexia on Instagram with the play on words of the science of reading, Soar with Dyslexia. And I have over 31,000 followers now, and I truly believe every single new follower on any of social media, including the Decoding Dyslexia, is somebody who's willing to learn about dyslexia awareness or the research into how we learn to read. And it's been wonderful because I've met so many incredible people and organizations through social media. So it's been absolutely wonderful.
So what are your handles? Where can people find you?
Well, my Decoding Dyslexia Quebec is exactly that on Facebook. On Instagram, I have that Soar with Dyslexia, and that's where I really share a lot of things that I actually do in my classroom. So I will post not only research and information and how to bring that research into the classroom, but I do post a lot of, no kids, no pictures of kids, but them doing work or me blurring out their face because I want to share what does explicit systematic instruction look like and what things we should not be doing maybe in our classroom as well, or getting rid of some flawed ideas as well. And I am on Twitter or X now as just Melanie Brethour, and LinkedIn. So a few different places, few different platforms, but I would say the majority of the practical is on Instagram.
Do you know who nominated you for this award?
I do, actually, Kim Lockhart. And just to show you, through social media, we met, she's an Ontario teacher in Kingston, and we met through social media. And it's, as I said, there's an amazing community of advocates and teachers out there, and she was so kind to nominate me. So I want to thank Kim for that.
Well, that's great. I'm sure she recognized the passion that you clearly have for this and likely appreciated the work that you're doing with both the students and other educators as well. I'm sure that award is well earned. So congratulations again, Melanie.
Thank you. I was so honored and just, so thankful that I was nominated with so many wonderful educators out there. So thank you so much.
Thanks for listening to this episode of the series showcasing the winners of the 2024 Dyslexia Canada Educational Excellence Awards. To learn more about this year's winners, visit dyslexiacanada.org, where you can read a blog about each of them. Now stay tuned for our next episode.